Hello, this is Alex Burkett, and you're listening to the Long Game Podcast. This episode is a part of our Kitchen Side series, where we pull back the curtain and show you the behind-the-scenes conversations, debates, strategies, and brainstorming sessions that happen at our agency. This episode was recorded in person in New York City, which is a first for David, Ali, and me. It's also a two-parter, and in this episode, part one, we cover several topics, most of which spring from and relate to a sprint of customer research that we recently did. Basically, we interviewed a few dozen marketing leaders and triangulated the top patterns, pain points, challenges, and themes that came up. And then we used those as conversation starters in this podcast episode. So, of course, things like AI, the future of search, and different trends related to SEO came up, but also brand and brand versus demand, attribution, analytics, MQLs, a bunch more. So without further ado, enjoy this episode of the Long Game Podcast. Well, what should we start with? We're in New York City together. That's an exciting start to the conversation. We usually do these on Riverside.
Yeah.
Previously on Zoom. And I think this is the first time we've ever recorded in person together.
First time. This is legit.
We tried to do one in New Orleans.
That didn't work.
Didn't work.
Yeah, I don't have any alcohol in this. Just for the record.
Pure caffeine to
I'm sober.
generate our conversation today.
So we did this research. I think that's probably the cue up. How do you even set the stage for this? So like everybody's talking about doing customer research, right? Like talk to your customers is the number one point on every listicle that has ever been written about marketing.
Number one, know your audience.
And I don't even know why we decided to do this. I think it was because LinkedIn is kind of the digital water cooler at this point. Like there's not a lot of there's a couple Slack communities that you can kind of get info and insights. And, as business leaders, you want like signal in order to make decisions on where the market is moving. And I think particularly with regards to AI, different sentiments around SEO and falling click-through rates and, HubSpot like blew up the marketing world and their traffic drop screenshot. I think the past few months were like, all right, let's get like boots on the ground, ear to the ground and actually talk to marketing leaders and see what the signal is versus what the noise is. Find commonalities in what their pain points are and how they're thinking about marketing in 2025 and beyond, and see if there's any patterns that we can tap into, which is for our own messaging, I think. Like that's one use case for it. It's also like which services we can build out. And then it's also like what we should be investing in, is Artifact A, is that hype or is it is there reality to it? So we embarked on a tour of I think we've gotten 30 or so interviews at this point.
Yeah. I think you asked a key question, actually, Alex. I remember you're like, we see all this stuff on LinkedIn, but is this what people actually care about? Like day to day, are they even doing anything about this? Or is it just all hype? And that was interesting because I've spoken to a couple of my friends who are marketing leaders and I'm like, hey guys, what are you doing with AI? Is that even a thing you think about day to day? And they're like, no, we're trying to get demand. We're not even at the stage where we can think about AI right now because we need to build a lot of the programs from scratch, or we're thinking about what the program should even look like or what the next version looks like before we start introducing AI and automations to everything. So that became, for me, an impetus to partner and do all these interviews and be like, okay, if these 2 or 3 people just ad hoc are telling me that the stuff we see on LinkedIn are not what they care or even think about or have any time to think about, what do they actually think about? And the interviews were very eye-opening. It was a lot of back to basics, to be honest.
Yeah. I also found that the folks I talked to at the end, they were like, what are you seeing? Like you're working with more marketing leaders than I have right now, right? They're just in-house, a singular team. I had a couple people, they're like, well, what are you seeing? Is this corroborated with what you guys are seeing on the market and with your clients? And some of it was yes, some of it was not yet. But I thought it was an interesting gut check on where our expertise is and where we need to flesh out more knowledge or personal experience, like you said, validating service ideas.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a research summary, not in front of us. This is just notes for like which questions we want to cover. But it does spring from some of the preliminary research summary. But I'm curious, just from your anecdotal vantage points from the conversations you two have had, maybe Allie, what are some of the common themes that you heard, and maybe what are some of the surprising insights that you got?
Every single person I talked to saw a drop in traffic. Every single person, their leadership, CMO, CEO, was like, why is this happening? What does this mean? Like, this is a big deal, because they're so far removed. They can just see like a chart and it's down and to the right. So one of the themes I heard was like, we had to not only investigate and plan to correct this, but also re-educate leadership on the fact that this is not necessarily a revenue generating metric. It's a leading indicator to other wins, conversions, pipeline, all of that. So that was something I heard across the board. Heard video across the board, both in we are doing and or we want to do, like we're currently validating video SEO. Every single person I talked to mentioned AI, not as a core component of their content generation, but in keyword research, more of like the tactical, automating some of the systems and the processes that took a lot of time, but they were still trying to hack the quality of the inputs, which I thought was interesting because we are too. And I was glad to hear that they weren't just streamlining across the board and not thinking about the inputs, because the inputs beget the outputs, all of that. So those are the three things that stuck out the most to me.
I'm surprised that every person you talked to said their traffic dropped.
Not as aggressively as all that stuff we saw about HubSpot, but enough. Like the three conversations that stand out were for brands that had been growing pretty notably over the past like 3 years, where they have like really strong brand recognition, they're top in their space. And so they're getting a lot of top of funnel traffic, a lot of brand related traffic. So I think they had grown so much and so quickly that any sort of drop would have raised a flag for leadership.
When you say brand related traffic, do you mean branded search terms or more like brand marketing? Like top of funnel, like both. Educational? Okay.
Both. Like they could get away with publishing a ton of top funnel and not necessarily have to justify it because it was growing traffic. And now that top of funnel traffic is dying and we don't necessarily care, the narrative has to be different to leadership, of like justifying the investment into content, justifying how this ties back to like what problem is it solving, how's it tie back to the product, how's it tie back to our pipeline, how's it tie back to what sales is hearing in their calls. That wasn't an exercise they had to do previously. And now in order to continue with the velocity that they were investing, I think I'm far from the mic, into content, they had to basically just realign with leadership on like, okay, we're going deeper than traffic. Let's not be too scared, but here's what this means. Here's how I fixed it, all this stuff.
Did they mention if leads and revenue were also down, or was this like, Rand Fishkin's got that video and blog post out that's like traffic down, revenue up, which is like, we've heard that from tons of people, like prospects specifically, I would say.
For clients.
We've seen it from clients from time to time. And that's where this whole idea of like, that blog post that I wrote, tofu is suffering, let it die, right? It's like, it wasn't relevant in the first place. Did you dive into those like areas with the interviews, or was it not touched on in the convos?
I asked when they brought that up. I was like, well, what about, conversions and revenue? Were you able to at least kind of lighten the blow or maybe change the theme of the conversation with your leadership team? One person said that they were stagnant or on track. So that helped them kind of keep their CEO from freaking out. That's how it helped refocus him. The other two people that come to mind for me, they actually hadn't necessarily been looking at that as a North Star metric for their content team.
They weren't looking at traffic?
They weren't looking at conversions and leads.
Oh.
Leads, conversions, pipeline. Traffic was their NSM. It was how their team was gold. It was how they got more headcount. It was how they justified anything they were doing. And it was also what led their content strategy. So before they went to leadership, they really had to not only investigate the loss of traffic, but realign their team to say, hey, CEO, yes, this is happening. Here's what it means. Speaking to the larger trends in the industry, we're no longer pursuing this as a North Star metric. Here's why. So they didn't actually have a ton of visibility into their conversions at the time of speaking, but they were starting to goal themselves on that and use that to inform net new content and optimization opportunities.
And this is, David, your traffic trap in a nutshell, right? Like this idea that, you're gold on traffic, you enter this kind of hamster wheel where you end up, your incentives dictate your behavior. So you end up writing about and choosing and prioritizing the highest traffic queries and terms and topics in opposition to maybe the more relevant ones, because there's always a trade-off, right? Sometimes you can get a high traffic, high relevant one. There's like not that many of those. So when you're building out a roadmap and you've got this like constant fuel that you need for the fire, which is content creation, you end up prioritizing really top of the funnel, highly irrelevant, like shrug emoji is the classic one for HubSpot. And then because your incentives were that, when that may start to fall, you end up like trying to replace that lost traffic as opposed to trying to re-underwrite or reallocate your resources to what would have been the business appropriate strategy in the first place. But you noted something on LinkedIn the other day, which is, this is outside of your interviews and conversations that we're talking about, but I think you talked to a prospect who seemed to have a different tone, like something that was more resembling what our ethos has been the whole time. So it seems like there's like a little bit of a vibe shift happening.
Yeah, it was actually a client, and this person is by experience more of a content person than an SEO, which is why we got brought in to help build out that program. And every time I make this case for any client, I expect pushback and lots of questions, but I just told them, hey, I recommend going after these topics, which the data says there's less people searching for them, but they're a lot more relevant and more likely to get people to sign up to use your product or get a demo. And I wouldn't recommend these topics that have high search volume because they're very top of funnel. It's very educational. It's 101. People searching for this stuff are not ready for a product yet. And the answer I got was, makes sense. There was no pushback. There was no desire for that high traffic, seemingly relevant keyword. And I kind of took a second to pause and moved on because there was nothing else to say for that. And we do have another client from the past who had a similar situation. They're a pretty beloved brand in the content space, and they do a lot of video. They do a lot of written content. They do a podcast, and they came to us and they said, we have a lot of top of funnel traffic that's not converting. We've optimized them over and over. And when you go in there, you can see how it essentially turned into keyword stuffing. And I think it was a forcing function for them. Like, we can't optimize these anymore. What are we doing? Like, we have an A+ in ClearScope already, but we're not ranking or we're not getting any conversions. And so we had to help them have that conversation with their leadership team and say, hey, we've actually been measuring the wrong thing. Like, we need to focus on these pages or topics that are more likely to generate conversions, and help them with that. And I'm actually very impressed because in order to have that conversation, you have to admit that you were optimizing for the wrong thing. And your leadership team needs to be open to that conversation, not just fire you, right? So there's a lot that needs to go right there, and some courage, and perhaps the folks who realize, oh, there's actually been a shift in the way we do a lot of these things. The old quote playbook is not, you can't just run that same play over and over again. So it's been refreshing to see that.
There's an element of this that to me feels like we as humans like to have some predictability and control over what we're doing, as opposed to admitting that there's some senselessness or randomness or like some aspects of our results and outputs that we cannot control.
We want like some clean narrative, like I did this and this happened. Yeah.
And that's why you end up kind of abstracting to like the very proximate layer with your metrics at times for like, say, MQLs versus SQLs or high quality pipeline, high fit pipeline opportunities or revenue or something like that. And that's where you get traffic, which is, something you can analyze, you can report on. It's relatively accurate. There's certain breakdowns, when you get into like bucketing sources and whatnot, but it's generally pretty precise versus like, I feel like we're in the middle of this shift, and there's been a bunch of different converging trends. So dark social is one of those things where you realize like as you make decisions, especially in B2B context, but also in consumer context, right? A lot of it happens outside of the ear, outside of the telemetry of Google Analytics 4 or Amplitude or something like that. It's like us discussing something in a bar. It's like what we were talking about last night with TV shows, right? We were talking about Severance and White Lotus, and it's like we weren't searching for those things. Like we weren't like even clicking on social media links that may have been tracked. So there was already this trend towards discovery via dark social on Slack or within communities or whatever. And then I think there's this other trend, which is zero-click content. So it's all these like LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook and whatever platforms trying to keep you on the platform. And then I recently saw Michael Peachy from Day.ai posted this kind of insight that he found, which is people are coming to demos for Day and they've already gone through like OpenAI's deep research. So they've already like poured through like 35-page documents on the solutions in the market, and their information.
Wow.
There used to be this large information asymmetry, right? Like you would go into the call and like they would have very little info and you would have a lot. And now they're coming in with like their whole like decision criteria is laid out and they kind of understand everything already. And that's all been done in a way that hasn't been tracked because it's like agents essentially doing that work for you. So it's like, how are you going to track that? But in his case, he said they're actually coming in much higher intent, much higher quality leads, right?
So they're booking, like the fact that they booked in the first place is a really good signal. Like they already know what they need to know. So they're looking to go deeper into like maybe behind the scenes.
I think effectively a lot of what we call the customer journey is invisible. Right. Because in the past, maybe that would have been a multi-touch attribution model that showed some like click on like a LinkedIn, like thought leadership ad, and then maybe like an ebook download. And then maybe you're on their email list and you see their open rates throughout, a sequence of 6 emails. And then you can kind of designate the credit for each of those touch points. But like now in this case, a lot of that actually happened without ever being tracked. So it was kind of this invisible customer journey.
What was discussed in the sales call? If they had done so much research beforehand, what was discussed?
I don't know if he went into that detail on the LinkedIn post. I think it was more just like, it was like kind of an interesting, thought-provoking thing. I don't think he even had a takeaway. He's just like, it's probably going to be the case that this happens more and more in the future. And like when you're thinking about marketing strategies, like how do you set yourself up for that? It's just a completely different paradigm.
It's so interesting too, because I was just talking to another client and they said, hey, a lot of what we're doing in our strategy right now is very bottom of the funnel. Like we're just focusing on capturing people who are already looking for a solution. And I said, yeah, exactly. Like a lot of the top of funnel, highly educational stuff is actually what's not performing as well. And you want to capture people who are currently looking for a solution now. Like why focus on people who are not looking for a solution when there are already people looking for it right now that you're not capturing? And it's interesting how Mike Peachy brought that up because that doesn't even talk about the top. The top of funnel is like super invisible right now. Like I have people reaching out to me asking what software or vendors that I recommend. That's not getting tracked. And it just means that the intent signals mean a lot more when it happens. Like someone requesting a demo is no longer at the high level evaluating phase. They're at you are top 3 and I'm ready to make a decision soon. Whereas before they might just be doing that as they're figuring out who should even be on the short list. And it's similar for, I think, SEO and content too. Like, sure, if you want to do top of funnel, like that can be a strategy. But for a lot of the companies that are focusing on more bottom of funnel, high commercial intent keywords, it's like, hey, we understand that they don't want to come to us for that top of funnel education, but they do want to know if we should be a contender for a short list. So, I mean, I don't even know what that means for the way folks should even be doing sales too. Like that conversation must be so different because you're no longer holding the keys to all the information that they may be looking for.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, I think it's not like the future is not evenly distributed, right? Like that's, I don't know who said that. Some tech person in Silicon Valley years ago. It means that like a certain portion of the market, the early adopters are going to be a lot faster to take on some of these things. Like I don't think the majority of people who find us are like finding, SEO agencies through deep research or, like we have some portion of people who come in via like LLMs that find us in like ChatGPT, but we still have like a large contingency of leads that come through that are like high quality that find us via a bottom of the funnel search result, in traditional ways. So I don't think it's necessarily going to be like tomorrow it completely is transformed. I think it's going to be very like, I never say this word right. Heterogeneous. Do you know how to say that word? I know homogeneous.
I can see it in my brain.
But heterogeneous.
Homogeneous.
Yeah.
Listeners,
it's not even.
You know what we're talking about.
It's chunky, it's not smooth.
So I have an interesting thought from what you were talking about, David, with bottom funnel. I mean, I think the conversation has changed online. So when I talk to prospects who want to work with us, there's not a lot of surprise on what I say bottom funnel first, whether through optimizations or net new content strategy. Like they're aligned on like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Of course, we want to capture folks who are right on the cusp of requesting a demo, signing up for our free trial. Couple folks I'm working with right now, they're really big on trustworthy content and education. And it's because their industry has previously not been, I don't want to say honest, but competitors haven't gone about their content strategy in the most straightforward. Like, I just want to help you solve this problem kind of way. Mm-hmm. So the client, in addition to the bottom funnel first strategy, they've been asking like, what do you think about more like mid funnel, even verging into top funnel topics that we know are really important to our audience and our current customers? Where does that play a role? And does that mean like we should do top funnel, right? So there's a couple things to unpack there, but I'm thinking like longer term with this client, you fill the bottom funnel, you keep an eye on it, right? Make sure it's performing, especially the posts that are generating pipeline. You keep those top of the SERPs. I do see value in mid-funnel, jobs to be done, pain point driven content, especially that has decent volume, because maybe it's not a direct line to the demo request, but it still helps this brand because they're up against some pretty big incumbents that are just like household names, right? Or office names or something. Like it's the go-to for their industry. So I do see the value eventually at the 6 or 12 month mark in moving up funnel, kind of setting the expectations slightly different with this client and what we can expect for performance. Maybe it's a longer play. What do you all think about that? And what role do you think that plays with some of our clients?
I think this actually aligns with one of the topics that you've been talking about a lot, Alex, which is just understanding your customer better than your competitors. Like maybe it is top of funnel, but I'm going to make a couple of assumptions here that the incumbents, they're probably established. They probably have very authoritative websites. They can write about whatever in a very superficial way, not care about EATT and still rank on the top search results. But the way that maybe this company is trying to compete is, hey, how do we just be more helpful and not as superficial and maybe have more trust and credibility and actually provide something that's valuable and not something written just to rank in search? And I think that comes back to, I mean, on a meta level, we did this by speaking to marketing leaders, but for them, it's just great. You know exactly what your customers care about. Speak directly to those things and don't think about what's going to rank in search, but focus on like what are the actual questions they're asking rather than optimizing for like a search result.
Yeah, I think they mentioned too that the competitor, like the surface level content the competitor published has kind of put a bad taste in customers' mouths about this type of software in general, being redundant or unnecessary or just not trustworthy. And that's a pretty extreme case. But I did anchor the client in saying, like, we want to help you make money first. That's where our focus is going to be. But I see this as a secondary goal to complement what we've already been working on and help the brand name become synonymous with something a little bit more trustworthy. So I thought that was an interesting, not necessarily a counterpoint to the tofu is dead, but an alternative approach to it.
What do you mean by, like, what's an example of top of funnel content that I mean, don't like give away the client or anything, but what would be like a loose example of what like a topic or a format would be?
Yeah. Can you say like the industry?
Equity management.
Okay.
Cap table.
So like
what is the top of funnel is like, are you just talking about like a what is, like a definitional
what is, how
thing?
to.
How to is like to me different than what is, right? Like I'm getting a little into the opinions here, but like I think like you can look at like there's kind of two like adversarial relationships going on, which one is like their competitors, And if you just look at that in isolation, then there's alpha in creating like trustworthy content that competes directly with those terms. But then there's this other adversarial relationship with the information ecosystem. So you've got LLMs that are essentially collapsing kind of information into the median value. And if you're not going to provide like anything above or different or kind of novel from the median value, then I think you're also going to run into the same problem, which is that like information access is, well, it's never been easier. And it's only going to get like less and less frictionful to gather like basic like definitional information. Right. So I think there's like kind of two vectors, and like the competitive one makes sense to me. But like the one with regards to like Google search and like the distribution engine, the you know, like you've got a user and like the product is content, and you've got this like bookshelf or grocery shelf, and that's your inventory, and like how that's allocated, like that part, I think it still suffers from those mechanisms.
Well, they're interested, I guess top funnel might have been too, I think I'm referring more to like mid funnel, but not the bottom funnel in the sense of how we define it with like software system, platform, tool, app, that kind of language, really high intent, best of, top, XYZ, a lot of those kind of queries or behavior. This is moving a little bit further away, where I wouldn't have recommended this as their first or even second course of action, given their goals of driving pipeline. So when he countered me, we came to an agreement that it's all important in different ways. There's just different priorities here. But his point was, I don't want to do it like them. I want to infuse it with our opinions in the market. Because when it comes to like financial content, there's obviously fact. And then there's different opinions of how to do stuff, how to combine forces and tools, and especially in the means of like growing a company. And their team has a lot of really good experience and opinion on that. So I hear what you're saying about like merging at the middle, but he wants to do it differently, because that was part of the reason that they're so upset with their competitor content, is this just bland shit. And he's like, I want to do it better. I want to make it more trustworthy. I was like, we can help you do that. But I thought that was an interesting alternative to like only bottom funnel, only driving pipeline. Like there's other goals you can layer on top, but I wouldn't have picked that over the pipeline driving content strategy.
I wonder if like, I mean, people talk about this all the time, like the funnel is like no longer an accurate metaphor. But when we talk about top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, and bottom of the funnel, if that may be also, it's obviously an outdated paradigm, and like in the sense that it was never actually true, in the sense that like you had high converting what is definitional pieces, and you had low converting software pieces. And like, it's not like if this, then that, like this is just like a decision tree logic. But I wonder if now when you're thinking about like an educational, let's say top of the funnel piece, if maybe the new dimensions that you want to think about, whether it's worth adding your point of view or like creating that piece of content, if it's like, what is like, on like a bar of like 0 to 100%, like how certain is this topic already? Like if it's like 20% certainty and there's a lot of wiggle room for nuance, then it still can and should be valuable to add that point of view. So I'm trying to think of an example. I always talk about experimentation, and there's like a clear definition of what like a randomized controlled trial is, like an A/B test. But then there's all this nuance as to like, should you do group sequential testing, or should you do, you know, like feature flags or like ABN test, you know, like there's a lot of nuance within that. So it's like you could kind of endlessly write about that from a top of the funnel angle without ever talking about the fact that you have an experimentation platform. And then there's other things that I think are kind of table stakes, or like they've largely been defined, right? Like if you wrote like an ultimate guide to email marketing at this point, like what could you add, even original data, like, because it's all been done before, like MailChimp, everybody's put out like data on like the best open rate, you know, benchmarks and like the best time to send emails. And it's like, everybody's got an opinion, or like, it's like the bar there is like 99% certainty. So that little last 1%, like, is that valuable? And
I would say if you do have something new to say on email marketing, burying it in a 6,000 word guide is probably not the best way to share that information anyway. So yeah, I hear you on that.
I guess like that's one dimension, but then the other would be like the severity of the pain point that your ICP, like how much do they actually truly care about this? Kind of goes back to our research, right? Like we're hearing certain pain points brought up over and over again, and some of them I would say are low valence. Like they're not like, they're brought up, but in the sense that like this is interesting to me, but it's not something that I lose sleep over. And then there's a couple, and there's more variance here because it depends on the company stage and who we're talking to at the company. But there's certain problems that you can tell people's eyes light up. And it's like, I'm so passionate about solving this problem. Like, I didn't get her permission, so I can't say like who it was. But one of ours like basically said, they're seeing both their Google search traffic rise as well as their LLM traffic rise. And actually ChatGPT leads, I believe, is their number one source of leads now. It went from like 0 to like their number one source of like self-reported, self-attribution. And she is just obsessed with solving this problem. And it's like the level of like passion and interest and severity is maybe the wrong word in the sense because it's not, I guess it is a pain point still. It's something that's like very salient for her, right? So that, I mean, you could come up with a million topics that range in our dichotomy from like what is to like how to like bottom of the funnel, whatever. But there's like the level of like salience of that problem is so high and the level of certainty is extremely low. So that would be an amazing topic pool if that were something that you were selling, which I guess is kind of like the industry we're in. Is like trying to figure out how to get people in, LLMs, which is like this new discovery pool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's important regardless of whether you're a startup or like a massive enterprise, like let's say HubSpot, because they've been in the has a lot of buzz in the SEO world recently. You need to have that unique perspective on the topic, and you can't just write this ultimate guide and rehash. Like you like to call like a book report. Like let me just go do a bunch of Google searches and then summarize what I found, but
you have
make
no
it like
contextual
5,000.
understanding. You can tell.
Yeah. Whereas what I'm seeing that's really meaningful right now is, and maybe you're actually referring to this company, but I saw a company where it was in the finance space. I looked at the byline of the person. I looked up who they were, and they had these certifications in finance. Like they had those letters after their names to show that they're credible. I'm like, oh yeah, this isn't some generic company team name or some random content writer. Regardless of whether this person actually wrote the article, which is a different topic. Yeah. They're putting it out as if it came from this person. So it lends more credibility. So when you first read it, you see this person with that certification and you think, oh, this is a lot more trustworthy than some random company team byline.
I think, well, we've talked about this in the newsletter that I wrote on the new gold, which was prompted by a question that you asked in one of our past podcasts, which is like, let's assume that all that can be automated will be automated, and not just by one company, but by every company, right? So then you kind of equalize a lot of the factors that go into the success of an organic growth program. So then what is the emergent like value add? What is the thing that makes you stand out? And not just stand out like in terms of like, how do you extract value or like gamify it? Like, can you drive more backlinks or something like that? But like, what value are you providing like your customers? Because presumably like that's a win-win scenario. You provide value, you get value back. That's kind of like the inbound marketing ethos. And I think that there's going to be several scarce commodities, but one is definitely like credibility, right? And we see that over and over in some of our interviews. I think you mentioned this maybe, like a lot of people talked about like how it's so hard to kind of parse out signal from noise on social media.
Yeah.
And I even talked about that on a LinkedIn post that I wrote today, which is like, Usman on our team constantly asks me like how I consume information. And it's like, I always have this super disappointing answer, which is like, I actually don't consume a lot of online info. I read a lot of like really long books, and I don't have a advanced note-taking system. I just remember what is important to remember, and I forget what I think is probably unimportant, and then like I'll spend maybe 10 or 20 minutes on LinkedIn scrolling through quickly, and I'll save posts for later, and then I'll kind of go down rabbit holes later. But I wrote about this and like how I really like guard my attention, and I try to find high signal, high information density sources that I can just trust repeatedly through time, as opposed to trying to wade through the sewage of the internet, the open internet, where it's like, you can kind of fake prestige, you can fake like authority, and there's certain tricks that you can do to gamify the algorithm and get attention, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's substance beneath that. So like for me, it's like I'm very conscious, I guess, of the filtering signal. And I think a lot of people are maybe less like conscious awareness about what they're doing. But I think you're going to see more of that happen from the consumer behavior side, which is like what signals are you giving that I can trust you? And then like over time, like, are you somebody that I will trust like in a cumulative compounding way? Does that make sense?
Yes. And it's resonating with me because I don't think businesses think that they're treated the same way, in that they might not be Paul Graham or an individual like blogger or a well-known person who people go and pursue their content, right? Like, to go to his site and read his stuff. He's not like optimizing his content. But I'm hearing like trust over time, you can continue to return, and guarding your attention. And I think more and more B2B buyers are doing the same thing. I think there's a little bit more at stake in terms of like someone who purchases our services, we want to make them look good, right? They're putting their name on the line in their company. They're putting an investment with us. Same goes for buying a product. I remember in one of my first jobs, I had to kind of tire kick to buy a product for my team. And it was nerve-wracking. It was like, I'm making this decision. Like, I want it to be a good decision. I did all my comparisons and everything. This was like 2016 or 17 or something. Actually, funny enough, it was Sprout. And I just felt like it was a big task that I was doing. And so I'm thinking like B2B buyers today, their behaviors probably changed, or LLM, Google, word of mouth, Reddit, all kinds of inputs. And at the same time, I'm thinking a lot of content that we're producing and we're seeing online is basically the free version of a product, right? We've talked about that. We talked about that.
Ahrefs, actually, I think Tim Solo talked about how he views their content on the blog as a freemium experience for the product, because he looks at it as you trying the product in your mind before you actually sign up for it.
Well, and to me, it also speaks to like, how much does this company care? How much time do they put into what they're writing, whether it's top funnel, mid funnel, bottom funnel, landing pages, whatever. I think it speaks to the whole company and the experience of the brand as a whole. So trust signals are fewer and far between. I think B2B buyers, all buyers, but specifically B2B, folks that are buying on behalf of their company, their names on the line, they're even more critical of like who they can trust. That's what I believe. Maybe not every single person, but I do believe that. And at the same time, some companies are taking less time and care in what they're publishing, right? And so I feel like they think they're insulated from this changing search behavior. And it just really resonates with me when a company puts a ton of thought, really good, unique perspective and inputs into their content, knowing that it's the first touch point that ultimately speaks to the product that someone might be purchasing. I know they're not synonymous, but to me, it's all under one brand name. And you can usually tell when someone's content is really good. I think it's likely that their product will be.
What do you, let's get really specific here. What do you think actually dictates like whether you trust somebody or not? And that could be a person or a brand. You could treat it in a really broad way. And we could even give examples of people that we trust as information sources or products.
We're talking as individuals right now.
Or
like
brands.
How we trust.
Right. Like I'll just give you one off the top of my head, which is like Chris Walker, I think does an amazing job with his content strategy because A, he's very consistent about it. B, I talked to him on the podcast, so I got to understand a little bit more of the underlying like data that he's looking at and kind of like the credibility of his sources of why he's saying the things that he's saying. And I think C is because he's doing it in a courageous way, which is like he's going out and it's like costly signaling, right? Like he's saying kind of disagreeable things and like he's like unwilling to compromise in that way. Like he's open-minded, but like he's got this strong take and he's kind of willing to be the bearer of that message. And I think that's not the easiest thing to do. So I think there's like this almost reverse, like because it's like maybe sometimes like unpopular or controversial, it lets me think that maybe there's more signal there. I don't know if I'm articulating that the right way. But when somebody like only says the things that are like in the popular zeitgeist, you're like, oh, you're like blown with the breeze, you know, you're just going to go wherever the popular wind blows. And I feel like there's something trustworthy or credible about that. Even if you're not right, it's like, I kind of believe you more, you know, like conviction, I guess is maybe the phrase that I'm looking for. So that's like an example of somebody that I think is like a highly credible or like high trustworthy source of information, specifically on LinkedIn, which is like not always the case. Right. And the other thing is he doesn't do like the tricks. Like he doesn't do like the selfie posting or like kind of like the clickbait and the hooks and stuff like that. So I think because not that that's bad. I don't think that necessarily makes you untrustworthy. But I think if that's the only thing, then I kind of look. I see the puppet master. I see the the Wizard of Oz. I'm like, oh, I see the tricks that you're doing, But those aren't apparent with him. So that's my breakdown on one example.
So you're saying you trust his approach. Like, you're not saying you take everything he says as gospel.
I take what he says seriously, because I look at him as a credible source.
Even if you kind of disagree with
who's going to be intellectually
saying.
Honest in the messages that he puts out.
Intellectually honest.
And then I can still probably like disagree with some takes here or there, but like I look at him as like a more serious purveyor of information. Mm-hmm. So like in the dimension of trust and credibility, I rate him like higher than average.
Yeah. One person that comes to mind is Pep, actually.
Yes.
Like the stuff he posts on LinkedIn, it's not formatted like clickbait. He's not using a ton of emojis. He's writing in a way where he's like, there's this thing I've learned that I hope you all learn as well. And here's my way of hopefully helping you learn that quicker than I did.
Yeah.
And it pulls from personal experience. He demonstrates that he's actually how he's learned each of these things rather than someone speaking with like high conviction all the time as if what they say is truth with no nuance. I think Pep actually does go into some of the nuance on a lot of things. And for me, I think it's the nuance that makes me trust someone. Like you're not just saying the same statement over and over and hoping that people listen to you. You actually go into the nuances on like, well, you can say it depends, but you also go into the various things that it depends on. And because you can speak to it in detail, I believe that you know your shit and you're not just talking superficially.
Yeah.
There's this, I see his stuff on LinkedIn all the time. I don't know his name. He has like a dash in his name, but he's an SEO. And he posted this thing about how he saw that his rankings, he lost his rankings. So literally he just copy and pasted the blog post into LinkedIn thought leadership posts, published it, and that ranked position 1. And that's just the type of stuff where unless if you're an actual SEO doing the work and running experiments like that, you wouldn't be able to share that.
Yeah.
And a lot of the armchair SEOs are not going to go do these silly experiments and then share it. Mm-hmm. They're busy talking about like the future of SEO with AI and all that stuff, but not actually doing the work.
So abstracting out like the ability to get your hands dirty and run an experiment, even if it's not a successful one that paints you in like the most favorable light. That's like a credibility.
You're like in the arena. You're actually doing this stuff and learning, not just a talking head.
I agree with that. Andy Crestodina for me is very similar. He just wrote like a post about how I don't know if you could even consider this an experiment, but he had been syndicating his newsletters to LinkedIn newsletters. I don't remember if he did like Substack or Medium or something like that too, but it was like that idea that he just went and did it and then later talked about it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like proselytizing or like theoretical. It was like, hey, here's what happened for me and take it or leave it. Yeah. But we did this and here's the results. And it was very much like it was data based. But yeah, that like roll up your sleeves and just get in and show me the data, show me what happened. Like I thought that was very credible. Personal
experience for me is a huge thing. That what you just said reminded me of that Ryan Holiday article you sent me about like writing on how.
So you want to be a writer? That's mistake number 1.
Yeah. Like you want to be a writer because you have something to talk about or just you like to write. And usually the latter group struggles more because they don't have anything to they don't have any experience, right?
His whole point was like, you should first have something to say. And he had talked about how he had all these experiences, working at American Apparel, which is like this incredibly chaotic and wild. And like, there's lawsuits. And then he worked with Robert Greene and like he moved to this city and like had this thing. And he's like, it gave me this fucked up writing style that's not like, it's not by the book. It's not like Chicago manual style. It's like my own unique voice that was developed through the experience that I had come through.
I feel like that's happened a lot with like the channels that we're all a part of is blogging, LinkedIn, social media. All of this started with people that had something to say. Like Andy Crestodina did his experiment and he was like, oh, this is cool. I'm going to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And then the channel blew up because those people were successful because they had something to talk about. And then it was like post on LinkedIn. And now people are posting on LinkedIn and doing the thing, either not doing the things at all, or they're posting and then doing the thing later. And it's like backwards now.
Yeah. I should have something to say. What should I say?
Exactly.
I need to find things to say.
Exactly.
Because there's this demand and there's no supply, right? Like the demand keeps rising for content creation and there's like no supply.
The funny thing is, I'm willing to bet money it's those people who then go to ChatGPT and be like, give me 10 topics to write LinkedIn posts about.
Yeah.
Like, I have nothing to say about these things. Great. Write 10 LinkedIn posts about these
and those
topics.
are like super unnuanced, like high level, regurgitated shit.
Give me the most incendiary takes that will definitely go viral. Maybe that should be our new strategy. I feel like it's been a lot of hard work trying to actually get this experience from working with clients and the headaches that ensue. We could just get incendiary takes from ChatGPT and just put those on LinkedIn and go 100%. Viral.
Yeah, that'll really help us. That'll really help us grow.
You don't want to get just a bunch of impressions and comments and. No.
We definitely did that before. Remember when you hired a LinkedIn agency?
I used to do these posts. It was like I didn't do these posts. I hired a team that wrote these posts, but they were like here's a free template, comment, give me that template if you want the template. And
with like 6 rocket emojis.
I didn't even make the template, some random thing that they just found or like made in like a Airtable or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I brought in the wrong audience. That was not successful.
But even that, I think, is really meaningful to share because you try to hire someone to help with this thing to see if there's any value to having a third party person write your thoughts and whether it can actually work. And in this case, whether it's the vendor we hired or maybe like the inputs we gave, but it didn't work out. But that's a really good experience because I'll even have people asking me, have you ever hired a LinkedIn agency before? Like, we're considering these 3. And I'll tell them about that experience that you had. I'm like, I strongly do not recommend it unless if you have like hella control over what they're going to be posting.
Or what are your goals, right? Because I wasn't necessarily selling influence, right? I'm not building a course or an email newsletter. I'm selling influence in the sense that like I have an agency, but ultimately it doesn't come down to like whatever like hot takes I have, it's like we're giving the gospel of like what we believe and what we build, but it's not the same as like I'm not monetizing information. So I guess if I were monetizing information, that would have potentially worked. But just for my specific case, my case, it's way more effective for me to like reach 55 people that are like really, really narrowly targeted, who again, like it's the ICP research, who deeply care about a problem that is uncertain, and I can provide like a smidge more certainty. Like it doesn't have to be 100% certainty, but if I can give like 2%, 5% more clarity on an issue like attribution or like SEO or like LLM, anything like that, I'd rather reach like 100 people than 100,000 with some generic message that's like incendiary. Yeah.
And just going back to what you opened up the conversation with of what we were hearing in those conversations, the thing I heard the most was exactly what we're talking about, which is, dude, there's so much noise on LinkedIn and none of it's helpful. Like there's no signal or anything. And one person in particular was very vocal about how annoying it was that all people were talking about on LinkedIn is like the future of AI, the future of marketing with AI and SEO and all this stuff. And he said, yeah, he's at a VC firm. He said, one of my portfolio companies just lost all their traffic and they think it's AI or views, but what are they supposed to do? Can someone just give me something pragmatic? Like stop pontificating about the future of SEO and just tell me what they're supposed to do. And so there's a lot more of going back to pragmatism, which is ironic because back in like years ago, the content that did really well was the how-to screenshots with the arrows, explaining how to do stuff. But now it's a lot more fluffy stuff that doesn't get as tactical, at least from the stuff that I'm seeing. And it seems like we're headed back in that direction of, hey, tell me, if you're talking about doing something, teach me how to do it. And don't just give me the superficial, actually show me step by step and help me learn how to do this thing that is super nuanced.
I would love to head back to that era of like just the old 2012, 2015, like the Ryan Holiday blogging era, and probably the era where Polygram's probably been doing it for longer, but like, people like Tyler Cowen, he still writes a daily blog post, but like there was this whole blogger network that like would just link to each other. And like, what was that blogger tool? Like, was it Blogspot or something where you'd have like a sidebar of links to other people who are like similar?
Yeah.
I kind of like that.
I love that.
The one problem that we have is like distribution. I mean, like generally speaking, everybody talks about SEO and how unfair it is. Like it's such a weird, like everybody's like so complainy about SEO, but like the real, I think, the platforms that kind of messed up content the most are the social platforms, and mainly by like disincentivizing linking out, because now everything is on platform and it's designed essentially to capture information and dwell time on the site itself. And that's not necessarily all bad. Like you still get like bite-sized info. I actually think like, as messed up of a place as it is now, like Twitter/X, the format itself, like, very short tweets, bite-sized, really densely packed. It was a good way like to get information like in a very concise format, and then you could go research further. But I think at the extremes, it ends up like disincentivizing longer form, more nuanced content. And even to the extent you're talking about these like how-tos and, I see video as being like this really interesting surface area in which you can explore more of those concepts. And I think YouTube is pretty good for that. But even the types of videos that go, not viral, like that's the wrong word, but the videos that do well on Instagram's more memey, but like it's not really like, but like LinkedIn, it's not like you can't really post like a 20-minute walkthrough on how to let's say like, analyze and diagnose what happened with like a traffic drop. Was it AI overviews? Was it falling click-through rates? Was it like diminished rankings? Was it like XYZ? It could be, several different hypotheses. Like what it like that would be a very nuanced video to post on LinkedIn, but it's kind of the stuff that I want, So distribution, it's still a hard problem, I think. The other thing I think on the credibility and trust level is, and this is going to sound maybe banal, but like the experience of the person. And I think we've like touched on that like loosely.
Personal experience.
Right. But like even so like when they showcase it through an experiment or like they talk about their experience, but then there is like a general heuristic too, which is like what do they have like a PhD in this time, like what have they done for 20 years that would lead them up to this? I'm not like a credentialist either, but like I'm saying like, what did you do for the last 2 decades that would lead you to be the person that I'm trusting on this topic? Because I find a lot of the times it's really easy nowadays to kind of shift and pivot and become an expert. I like this guy, but like Naval Ravikant, have you followed him on Twitter? It's
Not
like
lately.
He is an expert at whatever is trending that day.
Yeah.
Like whether it's like geopolitical, like, warfare, like whatever like is trending, he's suddenly an expert. And you're like, how are you an expert on all of these things?
How do you have opinions on all of those things?
Right. And how many people switched from Web3 directly to AI as soon as like Web3 started to feel a little bit less propitious as like an industry to be in? And like, how many of those people are true? I mean, like you could learn pretty fast, but like, do you have that level of signal based on like your experience, I want to trust somebody like Matt Gershoff, he studied machine learning and like he's been doing AI in some form or another for like a long time. And I want to read something from him, not like a marketer who took like one Maven course, which granted, like we're taking them, you know what I mean? Like
but you wouldn't claim to be an expert in AI.
No,
no.
I'm definitely an expert.
And that's why, we wrote that essay, like the boots on the ground. It's like, we're trying to like lead via like actually like getting our hands dirty and like working on the experiments, but I'm not going to like claim that I've studied, like I took a Coursera course years ago and like, I know theoretically what deep learning means and neural net, I can like diagram it out, but I couldn't tell you. I tried to build a classifier to classify different flower types. And I was like less than 50% accurate. Like I was so bad at it that I was like, all right, like I'm not going to be a data scientist or an engineer,
Flower types. That's
I will work with the teams that will build these things, but I'm not that person.
To me, it is interesting. Like if we use the AI thing as an example, we don't necessarily need to be AI experts to be able to speak to our audience about it. But with the experience that we do have, we can speak to it in a lot more of a nuanced way. So there are some people on LinkedIn who talk about AI very broadly and the various implications that it may have for the industry, but less nuanced. Whereas we can come in and we can say, hey, actually, yes, there's a lot of these statements made in broad swaths, but we can say from personal experience using tools like Cursor, using these different AI tools that, hey, you can do these things, 100% use them for these things. There's this group of things that is actually not that great for. And if you want to build product with AI, you definitely can do it, but it's not going to be secure. You're still going to run into headaches. You're still going to need a debug. And it's a lot more nuanced. And again, we don't need to be AI experts, but the marketing leaders we speak to who are asking how we're using AI or how they should be using AI, we can speak to a particular niche of people who don't need to hear from an AI expert on how all that stuff works.
I do think there's a there's a couple different ways to do that though. There's like the preaching way, I call it in my brain, of like, you need, or this is just truth. Whereas, you called back to Pep's content, a lot of I language. Like I tend to trust more content online, more social content online that uses more I language of like, I tried this, or I found this, or I recommend this, or my experience in Cursor versus Replit or whatever. That to me carries a lot more weight for folks that kind of sit in that middle ground of like, they know enough to speak to it, but they're not 20 years in with a bunch of credentials. That to me carries so much more weight. And I feel like it's a lot better at building that trust and being someone that folks can come back to or bookmark or follow versus it being this like generic lecture with a little like no meat to it.
That's just like a pet peeve of mine, that tone. Yeah. And you see it more on LinkedIn than any other
People
social network.
People think it makes them sound authoritative.
Dude,
and it makes
like
them sound
hook
stupid.
Structure template that's like, marketers, stop doing this.
I don't even read those.
Finger wagging at me. Like, geez. My attitude is like, you can do whatever you want. I don't care what you do at all. It's like, you do you. Like, I'm just going to tell you like what we're doing, and like you can maybe pick up on that. But like that moralistic finger wagging tone it's not even a serious point that I want to make. It's just like, I think it's an artifact of the platform that for some reason emerged, and I'm not sure why. But there is, like, if you scroll through, it's like, I really feel like I'm getting chastised over and over again.
Am I doing anything right?
It's like, you're doing this wrong. This is dead. This is the future.
Dead.
I'm like,
is anything alive?
I just feel really like disenfranchised. I'm like, what is right?
Nothing. Can't do anything right.
I want to bring up another thing that came up in these marketing leader interviews. And it was just this general sense of, what the hell am I supposed to focus on? Like, where do I invest? What channels, if everything is dead, what channels should I be investing in? And how do I make these bets? And I think we have our framework of the barbell strategy, where 80% of what you invest in is going to feel low risk. And then there's the other 20% that's maybe higher risk. But maybe we can speak more to that, because I've even had some startups come to me and say, hey, I want to invest in SEO. And I say, nope, wrong thing to invest in. You have a low budget. You don't have the timeline to see results in this because you're a brand new website. You should be investing in like paid or social instead. So I don't know. Did that come up in the interviews for you both?
Yeah, 100%, especially with the earlier stage companies. And then a couple of the VCs that I talked to, they actually said, we asked one question that was like, if you could like wave a magic wand and an external vendor like us could help with anything, what would it be? And the answer that I got several times was like, we just want like direction. Like we want like basically, how do we allocate our time and our resources and our capital to have the best like expected value? And it was really like the near term, right? There's the long-term value too, but especially for earlier stage companies, there's this analysis paralysis. And I think that comes from some of this like noisy arena of information as well, which is to say like, what is right? What is up? What is down? What is the right direction for me? The problem is it's a complex answer.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily like, even the barbell strategy is well, it's just one portfolio allocation. I mean, you could go 100% into risk. People win that way too. It's just 100%. Like highly random, and like you might go bust. And I think our model there is like, to Nassim Taleb's point, who, like coined that, like it was basically, you want to stay in the game as long as possible. And if you lose all of your money, you go bust. Your job is not just to make money, but it's to survive long enough to hit that big payoff, because eventually you're going to get a black swan if you're exposed to those higher upside bets. And that's why, like, I think we have a more risk mitigating, risk averse portfolio analysis, but you don't even necessarily have to do that, know? And then there's like company stage and product market fit. There's certain things that like we had a client who I think hit, I would say like an A+ across all the dimensions of their SEO. Early stage in a competitive industry, it was honestly unbelievable that their results were what they were that early stage. They did programmatic, they did editorial SEO, they invested a little bit into digital PR. The conversions were there. They brought in a bunch of like product users, and they couldn't monetize. So it's like, there's no, I guess, like safe, certain bet.
Yeah.
Because there's also like, if you're early stage, you could say like, all right, we've talked a lot about credibility and trust. And like one abstraction from that is that like people trust people typically more than brands. And there's this founder brand concept. we're on camera, right? We're leading from the front, and like we're trying to like beat the drum of our message. But like if you as a founder maybe aren't interested in posting on LinkedIn all the time or being on video, there's a certain level of like market content founder fit too. Where it's like if like even if doing a podcast was the best bet for your specific industry and business, and you specifically were not at an advantage there, then it still may not be the right bet.
Yeah.
So it's tough.
I think that last point you made is probably one of the most overlooked parts. Like I have some criteria I wrote down, like maybe it's the difficulty of the channel, how saturated it is, how scalable it is, like how easy it is to turn it on and off. Like if you were to start a campaign, time to results. But I think the part that people overlook is, especially if you're in an early stage as a founder and a person who needs to be the face of this company, how personally interested are you in being on video, in doing podcasts and talking to people or writing? Like we had a client recently who wanted help with editorial SEO, but also some thought leadership content, hated reviewing content, didn't want to jump on calls to give us a brain dump or anything. And so that just wasn't going to work unless if there was another way for him to get that information out. But that, I guess, like founder channel fit, perhaps is what we can call it. That, you know, if maybe you just want to pump pay dollars and get that out because you don't want to do anything in terms of creating content, that's totally fine too. Just, you know, figure out how you want to diversify down the line. But I think that's the part that people aren't talking about enough. Like it matters how long you can actually do the thing for.
Yeah, because even short-term channels like paid are not actually short-term. Like the payback for those, it's still like a pretty heavy risk. Yeah. So it's like you got to plan for some sense of longevity, even if it is like a minimum viable experiment.
Yeah, what you said about staying in the game long enough, I think about it in terms of like, especially for early stage, what should we invest in? You don't have any data yet to understand what works. I mean, you can go like one by one and talk to every single customer that comes through the door. And I mean, I think that would be ideal, but probably not feasible for a really small company. But trying a few different things, majority safe, some risky, staying in the game long enough to get those data points back. So then you can kind of hone into what's working and then have enough budget to try a couple other avenues as your founders get more active, as your positioning becomes firmer, as your budget grows, and then you're able to take a little bit more risk there. But what you said about where external partners like us can help, one client or one person I talked to had a really interesting answer. And she said, I want you guys to be our moat. Like, I want you to back our team as experts who support the strategy that we've collectively come together on. And I think that might have been, unfortunately, specific to her leadership and who they respond to. But I thought that that was a really interesting role in addition to building strategy, writing content, doing growth. Did you all hear that from anybody in terms of like an external partner being kind of to echo the internal team?
What do you mean, like a credible source that will actually get listened to? I mean, I think that's really common with consultants, actually.
Yeah. Yes, but also like she's like, we would ideally want to outsource our SEO brain power and have you speak to leadership and kind of be, I guess like the credible source or someone to back the team and get them the time they need to get results, get them the budget they need to get results, which I thought was an interesting role. I wasn't sure if you all heard that from your folks.
The way that I look at what we do is like, most everybody is selling something that's like kind of a deeper, like human need that relates to like your base level reptilian brain emotions, fear and greed and whatnot. So what we do is like on one level, we sell SEO and content marketing, which, you know, could be some amount of blog posts per month or some amount of links or research or something like that. But that's not really what people are buying. Like the proximate thing that they're buying is really growth, mostly, or it could be like fixing something that's broken. But it's buying into some sort of growth expectation. And then I think the deeper like distal value is often like a security, like a safety net. That I've mentioned this metaphor before, but like a doctor who, you know, they're not like their hand isn't shaking and they're not like all nervous asking like, oh, what do you would you be fine eating this new diet? Like what? But you want somebody who has this composure, who has seen your case 1,000 times before and says like, we got this. like I'm here, you know, that's like ultimately, I think the value of like an external partner.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I didn't hear that explicitly, but what every person ended the conversation with when I asked, like, is there anything else that you'd like to share or talk about? They say no, but I would like to hear what other marketing leaders are saying and what you're learning from them and how you're supporting them as well. So to me, if I would read into that a bit more, it's the idea of, I feel like I'm going through this alone, and I'm curious if others also feel sometimes this, I don't know if lost is the right word, but as if there's so much noise and it's hard to know where to focus. And so I think it does seem to be a common feeling right now.
I got that several times, and I got it in the sense of like this, like alienation or fear that you're not making the right decisions. But I also got it in a very tactical way, which I remember specifically the person who I interviewed that said this, but they're like, you work with a ton of companies, and it's highly likely that you have pattern recognition capabilities that we don't have. So like, if you could kind of pull in some of those insights and like connect those to like our situation, and maybe they don't all apply, but if you have like 10 companies who did like, you know, action A, and 10 companies who did action B, and like you have some sort of insider data from that, and you can apply that to our situation, we're sort of buying like the data that you have access to as well, which is like the pattern recognition in the portfolio companies that you work with. And that's common. Like you do see like all these communities popping up, and I think there is some level of like commiseration, or like we're in it together, or I think a lot of these communities like Superpath or Exit 5 or whatever, or Pavilion, Reforged, they're ultimately like, they're kind of a career growth thing. You join because you hope to accelerate your career in-house, or like if you're a vendor or agency or something like that, you hope to connect with people, and like it's kind of a networking play. But there is some value that's like, I kind of want to just be around like-minded people and like know what other people are facing and like what struggles, and to know that I'm not alone in that, you know? Like I talked to Ryan Baum about that, and he's been doing some research on communities, and that was like a big takeaway of his, is like content marketers and SEO specifically really want to tribe up and like make sure that they understand, like, how do we show our value? How are we doing attribution in this absolute wilderness of like the LLM era? Like, how are you guys doing this? You know, like how much do you get paid? Like all these things that like, you know, you're kind of in the dark until you come together. And I think like an agency can kind of bring that value to, not in the same transparent sense, but like we do have, I mean, we've talked about this a lot, David, like what is the scarce resource that we're accumulating? And in some sense, like it's data, right? Like I think it's a little bit, superficial to say like just Google Analytics data is it, but we're also collecting a lot of unstructured ICP data about marketing leaders, including through all the podcasts that we do. And it's like, if we can surface that and analyze it and synthesize it in a way that's useful for other people that we're working with, that's actually an emergent value that's outside of just like content and technical SEO. Yeah.
I'm thinking about like how others may be trying to get that sort of data, and there's plenty of state of reports where, I don't know, you fill out a survey and it's anonymized and you're kind of constrained to whatever options they give you in the survey. And even communities, I mean, a Slack community is still sort of performative. Like you're probably not going to be the most vulnerable in Slack and talk about all the things that keep you up late at night, or at least I don't do that. I don't see other people doing that in the communities I'm in, but we're able to have these one-on-one conversations and learn these. Some of the marketing leaders shared some really interesting, some did screen shares. Like, here's what I'm seeing. Here's the data. Here's what's performing. Here's what's not performing. I don't know why this is not performing. I have this much budget on everything. That's just not stuff you get in a state of report from a survey or from a Slack community. And what I find interesting is what we can do with this information is then go back to them and say, hey, I can't tell you who said this because we don't have permission for that. But I can tell you that someone in a similar type of like size company in a similar role to you, this is their allocation of budget, and here are the challenges they're having, which sounds exactly what you're having issues with. Here's how they're thinking about it. Here's like how I might think about it. And that is, I mean, you kind of become almost like a coach who works across many different people, sees many different types of situations, and can speak to, again, the pattern recognition that you mentioned.
Yeah. It's funny when you say coach, I always think like therapist, because now it's like a generation it's all coaches now. But that is, I mean, a therapist is mine will say that he's a petri dish a little bit. Like he'll pull in like your emotional tenor and like your experiences, and he'll be the counterpart that's needed to like push you through. But the way he does that is through like all of his pattern recognition over the many years, and like research that he's read and all the textbooks, and like he'll pattern match exact situation. I don't know what goes on in his brain, but it's got to be like avoidant attachment style, daddy issues, you know, like whatever the thing is. And he'll be like, all right, now I've got the situation. But don't you do all this pretty naturally, like when you're in a sales call or in a kickoff call or something? To me, like I'm probably like 4 minutes into a conversation and I'm like, oh, this is like client B. This is like client D. You know, like I know exactly, like it's not the exact same situation, but I'm like, the level of synchronicity here is too strong. And I know that like, within like wiggle room, like with certain tactics, like this is going to be the general direction, the play that's going to work for you, given these like kind of comes down to the basics, like the SWOT analysis, you know, given your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Like I can rule out these 10 things that aren't going to work. And then I am not 100% certain, but I have hypotheses that these are going to be the directions and we can tinker within these pathways. But it's really, really fast that I see those nowadays.